South Georgia Motorsports Park for the Ducks Radio Race, which is one of the biggest radio races in the country. We've been here 8 or 9 years ago. And radio racing is fun. I still listen to radio races, but we don't have much time to do them. The star of the show, Murder Nova, the legend with the blacked-out beast of a car, quit right before Season 2 of Street Outlaws started. There was no bang, just 55 days of brutal testing new parts, killer speeds, and there was still something missing. The car was fast, but the fire behind the wheel was gone. Pay attention, because what happened on that last run broke more than just the trailer. Murder Nova's last run. Back at the start, the numbers look good. Off the trailer, the first hit clocked to 383 at 198 mph, which isn't easy at speed that's big boy pace. The next pass came in hotter, with a 382 at nearly 200 mph on a brand new setup as well. Everything worked or seemed to work, but that was it. That was where the rise stopped, and the sideways glances began. Underneath the surface, the crew was working harder than a pit crew in a heat wave. The shocks had to be taken off and put back on at least 7 times, and the springs had to be switched out like light bulbs. The rear end had to be adjusted down to the millimeter, and everything had to be measured, tweaked, and remeasured. The car was talking, and the team listened. A problem came up with the temperature readers on the passenger side, and the whole setup went dark. Phantom started digging through the wires. One thing at a time, probes checked connectors, cleaned relays, and traced. It turned out that a wire had slipped from the plug near the firewall, likely because it was knocked loose when the firewall was replaced with a titanium one. It wasn't a big deal, just another small leak in the system that adds up. Then they talked to Brandon, the man who set up the system. He told them that if they were serious, they'd need 2 new tools, a soft lockup and something called wheelie control. The first one takes some of the pressure off the tire, so it doesn't slap as much and more smoothly glides. The second one keeps the front end from jumping into orbit, which is what this track used to be known for, cars launching through the finish line like bottle rockets. It was fun to watch, but bad for the suspension. Both upgrades were installed. Some wiring and mechanical bolts took some time, but they were done and the car was ready. Or to put it another way, the car was capable. Another thing was that the driver was in it the whole time. On the third run, the tires blew out, spinning right off. The next round they did the same thing, with no grip and no go. No one flinched or seemed surprised. It was like they thought the car would bail. And it didn't just the car. They pulled together for one more run that counted the last one of the day, which was a 79 at 198. So we went out for our first qualifying run today and made a good lick. We went an 80 in the first qualifier. 2011, 45 minutes from pits to lane. Smooth and precise as clockwork. But the man behind the wheel looked tired. And not just physically tired in the way that says this might be it. Last year's qualifying times were in the mid-70s. That 79 wasn't far off. He had the speed but not the vibe. This was the first time they ran this kind of tire in 9 years. Back then, the fastest run was a 286 or 288, with a bigger, they're back. But it's not the same car. The frame is the same, but everything inside is new. The radial tires make the ride smoother, but smoother doesn't always mean better. Some say smooth means fast, while others say smooth means boring. And Murder Nova, he always leaned toward the edge and chased the chaos. On this setup there was only numbers. Even when everything went right, something felt off. People kept smiling, but not the kind that sticks. No one cheered when they just shrugged, when the front end broke, or the door opened during a run. They grabbed a drill, punched a few holes in it, and bolted it shut. No repairs, just enough to keep it from falling off again. Yeah, it was wide open. Oh, I don't know what happened to that door, but we had to fix that too. That was the mood, not fixing, just holding things together. The speed was there, the tools were sharp, but the push was gone. Even when the team hit 200, it didn't turn heads. It was just another number, another pass. The car looked great close up, clean, well built, and with a radiator the size of a dining table. The front still had glass windows and a full street trim, but the people around it were quiet and just standing there, looking and waiting. Murder Nova used to draw crowds with just a burnout, but now people barely noticed him line up. Everything was done the right way, technically. But there was no fire. No one said the word retirement or he was leaving. But they didn't have to. It was in the way he acted, the way the crew moved more slowly between runs, and the way people talk a lot about going fast and breaking records, but sometimes going fast isn't enough. You need something else, a reason to push past the edge. And if that reason isn't there, It doesn't matter how fast the car is or how clean the pass is, you're out. That car, called the original, looked perfect. But even perfect cars break when they're not raced with heart. And every time Murder Nova rolled up to the line, it broke. Soon, someone else picked up the pace. Street heat and trailer scars. The team drove into deep South Texas, with the trailer shaking and the car barely holding together. The track at Edinburgh was wide open, with shiny black top reflecting the thick southern sun. The crew was there to make some numbers, test hits, quick pulls, and maybe even get lucky and dial it in just right. But let's be honest, this wasn't some clean racing. The Garage Queen was thrown together quickly, fired up, and dragged out. There was no time for comfort or second thoughts. Sean had his face buried in the laptop, poking numbers and making small changes to settings that would magically stop this car from blowing itself apart. They were nervous, not just a little nervous, because they remembered burning $10 into the pavement the last time they let go of that button. Of course, someone had to go to the bathroom, but they were here now, bolts in the hood helmet getting. The mood wasn't calm, and it wasn't about having fun. It was about not breaking something important, because this car was new, but new doesn't mean ready. The test hit, and it wasn't great. 5 seconds flat, that's not fast. That's not winning anything. But it made it down the track, unlike some of the others, and on a clean, new surface. Maybe that's something. So Kenny, the Miller family, and everyone else doing their job, I'm telling you, they slowed it down a lot to keep it alive. It was slower but safer than most, but they weren't here to drive safely. Time was short. They only had about an hour and a half to get ready for the race. And that hour was all about the drive. There was no room for error. They were trying to get a race time. And all they had was one setup, one tune, and one shot. Fingers crossed that rush finally hit when they started setting up on the street. The kind of rush that only comes when the road hums under your tires, and there's a real chance you'll get stopped by flashing lights. It wasn't about being rebels or running from the police. That part stinks. What they were really after was that one clean hit, that feeling of letting go of the gas, feeling the tires bite, and watching the world blur. That 5-second hit felt better than anything else all weekend. Round 2 was on its way, and more cars were coming in. One was a classic coupe, and another had a red body with fire decals. These were the big dogs, but this wasn't some comfy race. They were testing on the same sketchy road yesterday. One of them said it was his first real street pass in the car. And somehow, that same beat-up monster was still rolling. Barely. If your house loses all its walls but keeps its address, is it still your house? According to them, yes. That road had no mercy. Border Patrol cruisers went by like nothing was wrong. No one blinked. Locals waved. Even the officers just cruised by. Everyone knew what was going on. They weren't hiding. They were just moving quickly. The pass came, and it was loud. It held even though the tires were screaming and the motor sounded like it was about to give out. People nearby didn't even flinch anymore. That's how often this happens down there. But the real trouble began with a hill. A steep turn on the way to lunch turned into a disaster. The trailer's jack had been leaking just enough to drag low. It caught on the crossing and tore the front panel. There was full-on metal carnage, stuff hanging off, and the whole nose was crushed. This wasn't a trailer built for cross-country abuse. They used it like a tank and wore weekend battle gear. Torsion axles got people inside were punished. And the fix wasn't happening out here. They couldn't even drop the trailer anymore. It was stuck on the truck. I let go of the button, and it felt good coming out of the hole. The next thing I knew, it felt like it laid over. It wasn't making any power. Luckily, the truck pulled hard. People still wanted to hit, but every time someone got in a car, traffic came out of nowhere like clockwork. The road was clear all day, then boom. The main driver wasn't testing like the others because he had already raced the night before. He had data, fast data. There was no need to beat the car to death before the main show, especially since they had just blown an engine. No one wanted another engine to die. Still, that car had to make it through over 25 passes to make it to the event, which was a big risk. If they broke it again, there was no backup, no rescue plan, just another tight spot. Later, on the same sketchy road, someone laid down one more run, and the sound of the hard tires and flying debris hitting the empty fields made people look up. Not angry, but amazed. They pulled up, backed up, and revved up, and then they were off. At first, even the police didn't seem to care. One officer showed up confused and asked if the road was supposed to be closed. They kept their cool and said they were only making one hit to check the car and nothing else. That officer wasn't angry, just confused. He told them to cut it short and get going. but it felt like time was running out. And they had to pack up really quickly. They weren't panicking, but they were close. They were loading before the police officer figured out what was going on. Tires were hot, tools were half-packed, and it was just enough to call it. The car made a lot of noise. It sounded like it was ripping the air apart. It screamed past the crowd, and people on the side of the road just stood there waving and filming it. Some federal patrols even drove by, nodding as if this wasn't strange. After the earlier hit, one of the guys looked at the damaged body panel and shook his head. The front of the trailer was completely destroyed. The jack, the panel, and even the corner seams were torn. They knew this would happen one day. Those trailers weren't made for this kind of life. The rough roads they drive on don't care what kind of tires or frame you have. Now, they use bladders to protect the car's suspension. And even that's something new to them. Every race teaches you something new, and some of them cost a lot of money. Even with the car loaded, they were stuck. They couldn't take it off the trailer or disconnect the trailer from the truck. The whole thing had to move as a single unit. Luckily, that big black truck had the muscle. As soon as they got in their cars, traffic sped up. There wasn't anyone around all day, but as soon as the helmets went on, cars were zipping by. People leaning out windows, phones blaring, and horns honking. But they had to be. That car had to make it through 26 passes to make it to the end. They just blew a motor, so there was no room for error. As the night was coming to a close, they did one more pass, then quickly packed up, slid the car into the trailer, and locked the doors. Everyone was moving quickly. One guy waved to a passing patrol car and smiled like nothing was wrong. The officer stopped and walked up, saying he had heard they were racing. Someone told him it wasn't here, but about 30 minutes away. They told him they just had problems and had to. The officer didn't push it. He just said, "Make one and leave." As soon as he left, the crew knew it was time to hit the road quickly. The loud truck and trailer doors slammed shut, and the lights went out. But they weren't going home just yet. They had 5 hours to go. Down in the hot part of Texas, where the heat melts shoes and bugs come in huge numbers, there's one thing that's tougher than all the sweat: the concrete. It's everywhere in parking lots, on highways, and in driveways, and it can break your ankles. Here, blacktop junk would turn into soup. Concrete is king, and trucks are the only thing that can keep up with all that pavement. Not just any trucks. Big, loud ones that are clean, rusty, built for flexing, or barely holding on. People drive them like badges of honor, and sometimes junkers sneak in. But the gems stand out. This time it was all about finding one of those gems. It wasn't a museum piece, but a solid giveaway ride with a clean body and a hard growl that might have been a little rough. It took over 5 hours of driving to get there. Real Texas, not the Texas you see on postcards. The trucks from earlier trips were just heartbreaks. One looked good online, but up close it was like staring into a rust museum. The rocker panels were dusty and gone, and you could probably see daylight through both sides. That thing was also from 2014. It wasn't an ancient beast, but it was built like a soda can, with weak metal and thin skin. Then this one came along. It felt different right away. It wasn't fancy or flashy, but it was solid. It had square body lines and a bit of a... When it was idling, it had that thump. Hit the pedal, and the tires begged for mercy. It could have been the worn-out rubber, or it could have been the power. It didn't matter. It spun like a top. The seat was high, like sitting in a lifeguard chair. The steering wheel felt tiny, like it belonged in a toy truck. The tires were ready to retire. One stomp on the throttle, and the back end slid like ice, but it kept pulling. That part worked just fine. Some people like the look of windows that are all one piece, but others hate it. This truck's windows stood out. It felt strange, like something borrowed. But it didn't ruin the mood. Almost all of the gauges worked. The speedometer moved. The fuel needle danced. And the voltage one was dead but easy to fix. The radio wasn't working at first, and the subwoofer didn't rumble. It turned out that the amp was wired wrong, and now it thumps like a marching band. It had good gears and a strong limiter, but the rear end could use better traction and a stronger grip. The truck was proudly marked with stickers and tags that showed where it came from in Texas. Inside, it had seen better days, but there were still guts, a few broken hinges, and dust in the corners. But the bones were there, a real frame made of steel with real growl. Should old trucks ever be brought back to life, or left to rust as legends? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. More unfinished builds.